On Sunday, June 8, Australia lost one of its greatest ever scientists. Professor Richard Scolyer was 59 years old, and his story is one of the most remarkable in the history of Australian medicine. He was the world's leading melanoma pathologist. His research helped transform melanoma from one of the deadliest cancers on Earth into a disease that is now sometimes curable. He raised the 5-year survival rate for advanced melanoma patients from 5% to 55%. He was named 2024 Australian of the Year. And then, at the height of his career, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, the most aggressive and most deadly form of brain cancer. Typically, patients survive 12 to 14 months after diagnosis. Richard Scolyer lived for 3 years because he refused to accept the prognosis, and because he did something extraordinary. He turned himself into patient zero. He used his own research, the immunotherapy techniques he had developed to treat melanoma, and applied them to his own brain tumor. For the first time in history, today we're telling his story, and explaining why his death, as devastating as it is also the beginning of something that will save thousands of lives. Richard Scolyer grew up in Launceston, Tasmania. He studied medicine at the University of Tasmania. He became a pathologist, a doctor who diagnoses diseases by examining tissue under a microscope, and he found his calling in melanoma. Melanoma is a skin cancer. In its early stages, it's highly treatable, but once it spreads, once it becomes what's called advanced melanoma, it was, for most of the 20th century, almost always fatal. The 5-year survival rate for advanced melanoma was around 5%. 1 in 20 patients survived 5 years. Scolyer and his colleague Professor Georgina Long, working together at the Melanoma Institute, Australia, dedicated their careers to changing that. They were at the forefront of developing immunotherapy, treatments that harness the body's own immune system to fight cancer as a weapon against melanoma. Their work, and the work of colleagues around the world, building on their research, helped drive that 5-year survival rate from 5% to 55%, from 1 in 20 to more than 1 in 2, in roughly 20 years. That achievement alone would make Richard Scolyer one of the most significant medical figures of his generation. But in May 2023, his story took a turn that nobody could have anticipated. He was diagnosed with IDH wild-type glioblastoma, the most aggressive form of brain cancer that exists. Typically, patients live between 12 and 14 months from diagnosis. Less than 5% survive 5 years, even with the best available standard treatment. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. The prognosis is devastating. For most people, this would be the moment to think about palliative care, to prepare a family for the worst, to make peace. Richard Scolyer looked at his diagnosis and saw a scientific problem. He and Georgina Long had spent decades developing immunotherapy for melanoma. The fundamental question was, could the same principles apply to brain cancer? Could you prime the immune system before surgery, before the tumor was removed, to recognize and attack the cancer cells? Could neoadjuvant immunotherapy, as it's called, work in the brain, the way it worked in the skin? Nobody knew, because nobody had tried it. The standard of care for glioblastoma had barely changed in 20 years. Immunotherapy had largely failed in brain cancer trials. Oncologists were cautious, worried about toxicity, about whether drugs would even reach the brain through its protective barrier, about whether the tumor would grow faster than the immune response could be mounted. Scolyer decided to be patient zero. He volunteered to undergo a triple combination of checkpoint inhibitors, powerful immunotherapy drugs, along with a personalized cancer vaccine, designed to the specific genetic markers of his tumor, before his brain surgery, then radiation, then more treatment. The results were documented in the prestigious journal Nature Medicine and shared with the world. For almost 2 years, the treatment appeared to be working. MRI scans showed no signs of recurrence. He gave interviews. He spoke publicly about his experience. He continued working. He was named Australian of the Year. He told the world that the data from his case, whatever happened to him personally, would help future patients. In March 2025, the cancer returned, a larger volume of fast-growing tumor, in a location that couldn't be fully removed surgically. He was honest about it, as he had been about everything. The prognosis was poor. He continued working. He continued talking to researchers. He continued sharing what he was learning from his own body, for the benefit of people he would never meet. He died on June 8, 2026. 3 years after his diagnosis, more than twice the median survival for his cancer. Prime Minister Albanese offered a state funeral, calling him one of the finest Australians of his generation. The tributes have poured in from across the world, from cancer researchers, from patients, from families of people who survived melanoma because of work he did decades ago. Here's why Richard Scolyer's story matters beyond the grief of losing him. His case has directly triggered a clinical trial. The immunotherapy protocol he underwent, the triple combination, the personalized vaccine, the neoadjuvant approach before surgery, is now being tested in a formal clinical trial for glioblastoma patients. The data from his case is being studied by researchers around the world. Glioblastoma kills around 300,000 people globally every year. In Australia, it's diagnosed in about 1,600 people annually. It has been, for 20 years, a disease with almost no progress in treatment. What Richard Scolyer did, volunteering his own body as a test case, documenting everything, publishing the results, has opened a door. It may not cure glioblastoma. The trial may not succeed. Science doesn't work like that, but it has given researchers a pathway that didn't exist before, and the families of people diagnosed with this cancer in the coming years will have a treatment option that might extend their lives, because one man, when given a death sentence, decided to turn it into a research project. There's something else about Richard Scolyer's story that resonated so deeply with Australians. He never pretended it was easy. He talked about fear. He talked about his family. He talked about what it felt like to receive the diagnosis he had given so many other patients over the years. He was a scientist of the highest order, and also deeply human. Georgina Long, his colleague and friend, said this week that Richard had shown the world that, even in the darkest moments, curiosity and courage can light the way, that you can face the worst thing, and still choose to do something meaningful with the time you have. Australia has lost a great scientist, the world of cancer research has lost a pioneer, and thousands of families, in the years ahead, may find that they didn't lose a loved one to glioblastoma because of what Richard Scolyer did with the time he had left. Rest in peace, Professor Richard Scolyer. Like and subscribe for more Australian stories explained simply. See you next time.